Live everywhere on netrootsradio.com. David Waldman, Kagro, in the mornings. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, July 23rd, 2026. Time to get going once again. And Greg out again today. No big deal. Don't get concerned. Just taking care of a bunch of appointments at the end of the month. I'm doing the same in our family. We got get a couple of I'm going to be at the dentist like 5 times this weekend. Not all for me. I mean, I'm giving people rides to the dentist, picking people up, paying bills at the dentist when I don't need to give them rides. It's a lot of time at the dentist. And stopped in at the doctor, got blood drawn, all sorts of things. So we're packing all of the inconveniences into 1 week. Conveniently for you, but conveniently for me, and I guess also conveniently for you, that also means the decks are clear. We got a lot to catch up on, and I'm not certain how we're going to do it. I'm not even certain that we're going to do it. There's so many things happening. We should just jump right in. Much happening, believe it or not, on Capitol Hill. I guess they got in their heads, the Republicans in the House anyway, got in their heads that they need to look like they're doing something, although honestly no one is paying attention because no one believes that any of these things will also make it through the Senate, and also nobody believes that law matters anymore, so I'm not certain how excited people are getting about it. But a rash of, I guess, last minute, this is what counts as last minute legislating from Republicans in the House to, have some sort of record to point to. None of it will be enacted into law, though. Although some of the activity over the last couple of days will have an impact. Where did I see this? And maybe in my email. My email is becoming an important vector in bringing more of these stories. But let's see. Last night I saw one that had a weird. Yeah. All right. One of these, one of the trade mags, The Hill or something like that. I don't know which one it was. Had an odd construction to its headline, which basically said that the House had passed a framework for getting more Pentagon funding for the Iran war passed, and a few other things. And it was odd that they didn't actually explain what that was. Here it is. I think this is the one, right? The Hill. Breaking news. Last night they sent me, House passes Reconciliation 3.0 framework for Pentagon boost, voting restrictions. Which means what? In order, anytime you're passing reconciliation framework, come on, people, you know this, and you probably do in the back of your head, and when I remind you, you'll say, oh, yeah, I do know that because I listen to the show all the time. But it might not be foremost in your mind. But to pass a reconciliation framework, how is it done? You can't take up a reconciliation bill. You can't get the parliamentarian to recognize all the fun added extras that come with passing a bill under reconciliation without leaving instructions for it first. And maybe you remember, maybe you don't, maybe you're here the first time. Those instructions are contained in a budget resolution, and the reason you tend to think of reconciliation as being a once-a-year sort of affair is because budgets tend to be a once-a-year sort of affair. You can change the rules on that, too, and do things differently. But, yeah, in order to get all the privileges of reconciliation, the reason they do reconciliation generally, the reason Republicans resort to reconciliation, anyway, is to take advantage of the filibuster-proof nature of the rules surrounding passage of reconciliation bills in the Senate. That it's time-limited debate, and so therefore not subject to the filibuster. You could try to filibuster it, but when time runs out, you have a vote, and therefore your filibuster, to the extent that you think of a filibuster as something that will give you unlimited time in debate, is worthless. Anyhow, in order to do that, in order to get the parliamentarian to say, oh yeah, this is one of those things where we have to cut off debate after a certain period of time because we're debating under reconciliation rules, there has to be a budget resolution that says we are giving ourselves instructions to use reconciliation and how they're going to use it and what sorts of targets are supposed to be hit and who's supposed to be hitting them. You're supposed to tell yourselves as Congress which authorizing committees are going to be asked to find those savings and then send those recommendations to the budget committee. You'll package them up and then send them to the floor under reconciliation rules. So if you're going to have reconciliation 3.0, 2.0, anything 0.0, or point anything else for that matter, if you wanted to somehow claim that this was reconciliation 3.7, fine. Well, in order to do it, you got to put budget instructions in a budget, so that means you got to pass a budget. So why the headline doesn't say, as it usually does, House passes fiscal year 2027 budget, including reconciliation 3.0 instructions, if you wanted to make note of that. But I mean, ordinarily the headline there is they passed the budget. So it's a little bit odd that they've kind of stood things on their head. And the most important thing to them, of course, is the reconciliation instructions, because that's how they think they're going to get the Iran war paid for. It's how they think they are going to get the SAVE Act passed. But, well, we discussed this before too. I think that they don't think that. I think that they think that Donald Trump will think that, and then when it doesn't happen, he won't blame them. He'll blame the parliamentarian, but I don't really see how he ends up doing that, because I mean, he does know, he's got a little, you know how a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, they sometimes say. Well, yeah, so he knows, for instance, that they could overrule the parliamentarian, fire the parliamentarian, demand a different ruling from the parliamentarian. I mean, well, he'll point to, eliminate the filibuster. Well, that's not a factor when you're talking about reconciliation. So I'm not certain he's going to be able to straighten that out in his mind. But he does know this. You can say to hell with the rules and just do whatever you want at some level. It's possible. And he'll want that. So I don't know how effectively they'll be able to fool him. But I think they're doing this in order to make it look like they're giving it a shot and attaching the SAVE Act to everything. And I believe the House is now doing that. They're just basically saying, well, we'll append the SAVE Act to everything and do things that way. If one of them slips through, it doesn't really matter what vehicle we use, just so long as it looks to Donald Trump like we're continuing to try to do this. And the House is willing to do this and hand it over to the Senate and hang the Senate out to dry, because they know that, well, the House, I think they genuinely want to pass the thing, the Republicans in the House. And only about 3/4 of the Republicans in the Senate genuinely want to pass the thing. And the rest don't, and they view it as troublesome for their own reelection prospects, the party's prospects in general, and therefore oppose it, but they can't be seen on the record as opposing it. So the Republicans in the Senate probably unhappy with the stupid maneuvers of Republicans in the House, but, you know, give them time, and in a couple of months, many of the stupid Republicans in the House will be stupid Republicans in the Senate anyway. So the stupidifying of the Senate continues. Remember when we were told don't turn the Senate into the House? They meant, of course, that one, they were lecturing Democrats not to change filibuster rules. And two, they were talking about, yes, rules change. However, Republicans want to stick their thumb in your eye for everything. Don't turn the Senate into the House. They literally are turning the Senate into the House by continually bringing their biggest annoyances in the House over to the Senate. Even before they've learned the rules of the House, they move on to the rules of the Senate, which they never understand. And, you know, and then just sit there and stomp their feet and get mad about things. So anyway, interesting headline. House passes reconciliation 3.0 framework for Pentagon boost, voting restrictions. The story is pretty basic. $95 billion framework for a third budget reconciliation package that would boost funding for the Pentagon, provide agricultural aid, and provide money to encourage states to adopt voting restrictions. Terrible voting restrictions at that. $95 billion, that's a pretty low budget. Oh, yes, right. That's not actually the budget. That's their reconciliation target. They've $95 billion they need to finagle out of the budget and into the hands of the Pentagon. And, I mean, does the $95 billion include, I guess the agricultural aid, that's bailouts for farmers, and money to encourage states to adopt voting restrictions. Okay. The vote is a victory, believe it or not, for Speaker Mike Johnson, as he had to win over lawmakers in his razor-thin majority who were concerned about the lack of spending offsets in the package. And here's how he did it. Are there going to be any spending offsets in the package? No. Now, go ahead and do the thing we need you to do, or we're going to tell the president you're against him. So there you go. That worked. Republicans support our troops, our farmers, our election security. We're the only team in Washington that does, Johnson said in a statement to reporters after the budget resolution vote. Many of you doubted our success. I still do. But it's only the first vote in a long, multi-step budget reconciliation process, and the budget blueprint faces an uncertain future in the Senate. Senate Majority Leader John Thune, of course, said he would hold reconciliation as a backup. They put that in scare quotes. That is to say, he's not bringing it immediately to the floor. Hold reconciliation as a backup until the chamber works out a plan to avoid a government shutdown later this year, and other Senate Republicans have expressed resistance to the budget framework as is. Reminder here, too, just the other day, Republicans did manage to pass in the House, at least, and I don't know whether they did it in the Senate or not, but they have decided at this, I think, relatively early stage. It's late for a budget, by the way, but early for what they're talking about, avoiding a government shutdown. We are only about 70 days from a government shutdown, but, it's a government shutdown that threatens every year at the same time, the end of the fiscal year. And the fact that we are still in July, and they're attaching the SAVE Act to it and saying, this is a must pass. You got to pass the SAVE Act because this is a continuing resolution. And without a continuing resolution, now all your past memories of continuing resolution should be kicking in. But, not all of it, not too much of it yet, but just this should trigger in you, government shutdown, you avoid those with continuing resolutions. Well, yes, in modern practice, that's what they end up doing. Remember, though, the best, still the best and original way of avoiding a government shutdown, which is to pass all of your appropriations bills before the end of the fiscal year. Why does the government shut down in whole or in part? It is because some number of the 12 annual appropriations bills that provide money for all of government operations haven't been passed. And of course, as you know, pursuant to the Constitution, no money shall be drawn from the Treasury to pay for stuff like that, but by act of Congress, etc., etc. And if you don't act, well, then you can't have your money. And I know there's a multi-step process that goes into that, but that can be a topic for another day. So what usually happens, of course, is they work from, a budget normally you'll see pass Congress in spring. And then that will set them to work on appropriations bills after that. About how, what's the budget blueprint going to look like, more or less? How much does everybody have to work with? Here's the answer. Now all the committees go and have hearings and discuss how will they use their portion of the budget and try and make things work, or not, right? But then at that point, they begin passing the less controversial, less troublesome versions of the appropriations bills in late spring, in summer when they're there, long breaks around July 4th and various other of the holidays, Memorial Day weekend and July 4th. And then, of course, the annual onslaught of headlines about how the August recess is coming. And, of course, that's what's happening now. But then they end up usually taking their recess and coming back. Or during the recess, we get headlines that say, well, only 6 of the 12 appropriations bills are left. So the Congress faces a real race to the end of September when they come back to try to pass those remaining X number of appropriations bills, and sometimes they don't do it, and sometimes they make a last-minute attempt and roll them all up into one and try to pass an omnibus spending bill that way and do all 6 remaining bills or 3 remaining bills, whatever the case may be. Sometimes it fails. The government shuts down in part. Everybody else operates. The Parks Department, maybe whatever they got their appropriations, defense, or whatever you're calling it today, has gotten their part. But, no, I don't know. Department of, who's usually trouble in all of this? I don't know. Actually, usually the Pentagon sometimes, ends up becoming a troublesome appropriations bill. But whatever it may be, Health and Human Services hasn't gotten passed, and so they have to shut down that department that's covered by all the departments covered by that particular bill, which hasn't passed, and then they got to work toward that, and they will sometimes then say, we'll pass a continuing resolution and allow the departments that haven't had their appropriations bills finished to operate at the budget they were operating at last year, pending the adoption of a new appropriations bill based on the new budget. And, you can do that for 2 weeks at a time and give yourself time to negotiate a new bill. You can do it for 6 months if that's what you think you need. CRs are something you usually see in late September and into, October, or if things are really going poorly, November and December. Sometimes you just kick the can into December and then give yourself the holidays as a deadline to finish up your work, and that happens a lot. And so that's the usual path of things when they fall apart. Having said all of that, to now be saying, well, we're working on a plan to avoid a government shutdown 70 days out from that government shutdown. Like, on the one hand, you might say, that's admirable. That's good planning. Finally, they're actually working to avoid a shutdown well in advance of a shutdown. Why don't we do that more often? But what's interesting is that this is happening in July, and they're saying we can just attach the SAVE Act to it because obviously a continuing resolution is a must-pass bill. Otherwise, there's going to be a government shutdown, and everybody knows that voters hate government shutdowns, and they will blame the Democrats for those government shutdowns. That's the opposite of the truth. For whatever reason, everybody's been conditioned to blame Republicans for government shutdowns, so fine. So that's why they're so interested in avoiding it this time, I guess. Election is coming. If there's another government shutdown and people blame Republicans for it, the timing couldn't be worse. Right. So that makes a CR a must-pass bill. Yeah, for you. Well, Democrats don't like shutting down the government any more than Republicans do. Yeah, that's true too. But does that make it a must-pass bill? It makes it a should-pass bill. But then when you read the bill and it has poison pills like the Save America Act attached to it, which has no business being attached to a bill like this in the first place, it's the wrong kind of a bill. You're not supposed to legislate in an appropriations bill, and you're also not supposed to appropriate in a legislative, in an authorization bill. But anyway, if you're not supposed to be legislating in an appropriations bill, what do you think a continuing resolution is? It's an appropriations bill. It's a conglomeration of them. It's got a different name because that's, an easy term to use to, the people, some people will understand what you're talking about. Most normal people probably don't care at all. But yeah, that's one of the prohibitions, the separation of the processes. You're not to be appropriating or legislating in an appropriations bill. So you shouldn't be setting up a new program of voting restrictions, legislating, in a bill that's really only about passing out money that's been authorized elsewhere. That's, generally against the rules as they now stand. But they're just going to throw that out and say, well, it's not got the same kind of prohibition that a parliamentarian will say you're under a completely different procedure for. But people can raise a point of order against it, and you may have to overcome a certain threshold in order to waive that point of order. But in the House, it doesn't matter. It's just majoritarian. And they can easily waive that point of order or waive it by the special rule under which they consider the continuing resolution. You see, it's getting a little bit complicated here. The real point here is, I don't know that I've ever seen a continuing resolution in July or at any point where July would be the only point, generally speaking, where you are 70 days out from a shutdown. I mean, I guess it could happen if you give yourself a 90-day CR. 20 days later, you are technically 70 days out from a shutdown. But under those circumstances, if you are already working under a continuing resolution, you can understand why they might bring one forward 70 days in advance. But they never seem to do that. Anyway, so here they are trying to pressure Democrats into accepting the Save America Act with a must-pass bill that isn't must-pass. If this bill doesn't pass, what happens? Nothing. The government operates 70 days worth. You'll come back later and pass something else. Maybe it'll have the Save America Act in that too. Maybe it won't. You don't know. But, you'll have the opportunity to do that. It's just very unusual to see people putting forward a CR in July and thinking that anybody's going to panic about it not passing. All right, a little bit of a detour there, but I just wanted to reiterate that. Back to the Hill's article here. Thune said he would hold reconciliation as a backup until the chamber, the Senate, works out a plan to avoid a government shutdown later this year, and other Senate Republicans have expressed resistance to the budget framework as is. So the answer there is the House passed a budget with reconciliation instructions. Senate's going to wait and see what they do with the CR that they were handed by the House and haven't yet passed. Their first line of attack, do the CR first. The lower chamber, the House, and they're very low, voted by the overwhelming margin of 216 to 214 to approve this budget blueprint, that is, the one that includes reconciliation instructions, along with the Save America Act. The Representative Warren Davidson of Ohio, Republican, and Thomas Massey, also a Republican and not much longer for the House, plus Kevin Kiley of California, an independent who caucuses with Republicans, joined all Democrats in voting against the measure. Davidson voted no over the lack of spending offsets, while Kiley bemoaned the use of the reconciliation process for the Iran funding in the bill. That's a good point. I made it very clear that, number one, I think the funding for the supplemental should be bipartisan. This is going down reconciliation, which is designed to avoid any bipartisan consensus. Well, that's not the purpose of it, but okay. That's the way it's usually used these days. Number two, that Congress needs to be much more centrally involved in defining the scope of this conflict going forward and how we can end it, he said. That's, usually quite sensible. I don't know if that's his real reason or not, but it's a sensible sounding one. And this resolution is not going to set any sort of process like that in place. And then I also think it's wrong to have extraneous, items in there along with defense funding. I think it should be considered in its own right. So those are my three biggest objectives. And it used to be that was the Republican and even the MAGA Republican position, right? Simple bills, 3 pages or less or whatever. Maybe Trump wanted it down to 1 page and some pictures. And, single issues and enough of this conglomeration monster bills that have stuff in there that nobody knows about. But they found out that's actually a fun, exciting, and effective way of legislating. Unless, of course, every vote is, razor thin and you're never sure you can pass anything. The framework outlines $73 billion in defense and intelligence funding amid the ongoing conflict with Iran. $12 billion for agriculture aid and $10 billion for a fund aimed at incentivizing states to adopt Trump-backed voting restrictions for a total of $95 billion. Just a brief pause here. The talk around here, a fund aimed at incentivizing states to adopt Trump-backed voting restrictions. Which ones? Save America Act. Just want to remind you that Trump and all Republicans say, oh, everybody wants this. Trump says, 90% everybody. You'd ask people, their new stupid ID story. Remember, they used to tell the voter ID story. And this isn't a voter ID issue. This is proof of citizenship, which sounds the same, but isn't. We've been over that ground. You know about it. But they love to tell stories. Well, voter ID, you have to show voter ID. You have to show ID to get Sudafed. Sniff Sudafed in this country. Except, by the way, he does not get his Sudafed in this country. He buys the special Sudafed that you can only get in other countries, which of course will now be subject, by the way, to a 100% tariff, but not for him because you can't prosecute him for anything. So special rules for that guy. But yeah, then that morphed into, got to show ID to get beer. And it's all like, well, I mean, but there's a different thing at play here. The ID is to show, if it's a health issue, it's as opposed to showing ID when you vote, of course, now very famously does not establish citizenship. So the barrier is even higher. Plus, of course, you got to show your proof of citizenship when, at several other stages in the game that leads to voter registration. But now they want you to show it at every one of those stages. So very much I say like going to the doctor's office and being handed a pack of forms before you can get your regular checkup, and they ask you 17 times, your name and your social security number, but also, the same list of maladies and diseases over and over again. Just repetitive questions that apparently they need on every single form, and you can't figure out why that can't all be put in a single database and populate the form with the information you give once. But if you find that to be annoying and inexplicably ridiculous, then you'll feel right at home in the new voter ID proof of citizenship scheme, as you're asked the same question over and over. They ask you when you register, they ask you when you renew your registration, they ask you when you show up to get a ballot, they ask you on your way out in case they think about having ICE beat you up, whatever. All of this you have to do over and over and over again. And, but they do say in their claims that everybody wants this. 90% of Americans agree, which brings into question why you would have to pay them $10 billion to do it.
Hi, Kagro in the Morning listeners. This is Rebecca Romans, longtime listener and longtime supporter of the show. Do you love your non-corporatized, completely independent, commercial-free Kagro in the Morning show? Do you stand out among the crowd at the office water cooler when discussing current events because of all the up-to-the-minute news you've been brought by David Waldman? Then it's time to give back a little. David relies on contributions from listeners like you and me to keep this show on the air. Patreon.com is among the easiest ways to make secure recurring monthly donations to support the show. Patreon.com/KagroX will bring you straight to his donation page, where you can sign up for any convenient tier you like. A mere $5 a month. You'll never miss it. Works out to about 25 cents a show. That means that David is making 12.5 cents an hour, which, by coincidence, is exactly what the GOP wants to lower the federal minimum wage to. Once again, David is ahead of the curve. If Patreon.com doesn't sound like your kind of thing, there's always PayPal, or even the Square Cash app. Any way you choose to donate, please choose to donate. And thank you on behalf of David and the rest of us listeners. Thank you very much.
All right, welcome back, everyone, to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. And I guess we're the last show for the day on Netroots Radio, as it turns out. I think the situation is, I don't know, I guess there'll still be a West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy via podcast. But I did get, housekeeping note here, the message that power issues in the Pacific Northwest having to do with combating our own wildfires here in our own domestically produced wildfires. So there's a 100% tariff on Canadian wildfires and wildfire smoke, so that we produce our own wildfires and wildfire smoke here in the U.S. of A. And the other day, it took the station stream down for a brief period as a nearby wildfire broke out and took out the power connections. And as it turns out, some maintenance work from the power company, some note that they will be replacing, all the infrastructure that was damaged, or at least some of it, that was damaged during the fire. And that means power will be off in the area shortly, though, after this show ends. Thank you very much to the power companies and all the fans of this show at the power companies in the Oregon area. They're all waiting with bated breath for the show to end before, they begin their work, which actually means, 8 a.m. start time on the Pacific Coast, more or less coinciding with our 11 a.m. end to the show here. But I like to imagine that they're all sitting and listening to the show and waiting for permission to begin. Anyway, for those of you listening via Netroots Radio live stream and enjoying the transition thereafter to the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, some kind of disruption in that normal plan today. But usually you can depend on the podcast backup. So then you'll be able to tune in and hear more about exciting topics like the Reconciliation 3.0 plan passed in the budget resolution adopted by the House yesterday. As we were on our way out, I think we made the point, I don't know whether we made it clear or not, the $95 billion in reconciliation instructions, I guess, in this budget, or affected by a proposed reconciliation bill, broken down as follows: $73 billion for defense and intelligence funding for the Iran war. That's it. Basically, would normally be handled as an emergency supplemental appropriations bill under normal circumstances, but for whatever reason, they're doing this as, well, they explained it. Which member of the House was it who was explaining his objections? Kevin Kiley of California, independent, caucusing with Republicans, pointing out, normally, you got a war going on and you need extra appropriations for it. That's usually going to be the sort of thing you can get a bipartisan agreement for, funding war, except as it turns out, nobody actually wants this war. Even Republicans are divided on this war, and of course it's going poorly, and Donald Trump is ineffectual in leading it, and that was always going to be a given. But normally you just bring a regular supplemental appropriations bill or emergency appropriations bill and just pass that. Doing it under reconciliation so that you can try and get it through with a bare majority of Republicans in the Senate and not have to deal with the 60-vote threshold for a filibuster, to invoke cloture, as it were. Unusual. It's unusual that you would need that with troops committed overseas. But usually, of course, remember, here's a good way of connecting some of the other moving parts here. I think the inclination among certain folks, some of whom actually probably do listen to the show, would be to say, well, you can usually get a bipartisan majority together and even get 60 votes in the Senate to fund an ongoing war because there's a significant portion of the Democratic caucus, which is, I guess if you're making accusatory, if you're using accusatory terms, they are either bought out by the corporate interests or the militaristic interests, or they're neoliberals, and so therefore pro-war, and so that's why you can get their vote. Or they fear backlash from Republicans who will say that, they're somehow unpatriotic if they don't support the troops, even if it is an unpopular or ridiculous, unnecessary, or just plain foolish war. And that goes at least part of the way to explaining some of it. But also remember this. Ordinarily, for a war like this to be going on, or a war of any kind to be going on, there has to, or we used to think, there has to be or had to be at least some significant level of congressional support for it. And here's where you can bring in and tie in the loose threads of the War Powers resolutions, of which, by the way, there is yet another one coming to the floor in the House today, according to the whip report, Pramila Jayapal, I believe, bringing this one forward. But as you know, from our extensive discussions there, right, any commitment of U.S. troops and military strength and military capacity to a conflict is subject to a more or less 60-day schedule wherein or under which the president can commit those troops even in the face of questions or opposition from the Congress. But thereafter, to continue to deploy them, you need to have some sort of congressional buy-in to all this thing. Otherwise, technically, they can force a removal of American troops. And this all stems from our original remember the originalists? Our original understanding of the Constitution about who has the power to declare war. Now that we don't declare war anymore, it's up in the air. But, this is tied to this. In other words, you can usually find yourself a path to 60 in the Senate, if necessary, for supplemental appropriations for troops in the field conducting even an unpopular or questionable war, because you've had to first get the buy-in of the same group of people past the 60-day mark under the War Powers rules. So, if you've committed to allowing the president to continue with an American military presence somewhere or military activity somewhere, you can probably also get people to agree to pay for it, even if they're reluctant about it. But if you can't and won't even seek the approval of the people who are supposed to pay the bills to conduct this war, and you start playing games as this president is doing, as he does with everything, by saying every, quote unquote, ceasefire declaration stops the clock, and every resumption of hostilities doesn't just pick up where you left off, it starts the 60-day clock all over again. I don't think they appreciate that very much, and they're looking for viable paths to blocking appropriations for it. But, some of the Republicans find the pressure too much, and Trump, they're worried that Trump can unleash all sorts of threats against them, and he can and does. Democrats similarly worried, but for different reasons. And so if you can't get anybody to approve the thing in the first place, it's going to be rather difficult to go the ordinary route of bipartisan support for a supplemental appropriations bill. So that's how you find yourself with war funding coming to the floor, or proposed to come to the floor, under reconciliation rules, which I don't think I have seen done before, because it's never been necessary before for the reasons just outlined. So there you go. Of the $95 billion, $73 billion of it is that. Then there's the $12 billion in agricultural aid, and one of Trump's favorite moves that he goes to all the time is, I'll just send money to farmers. I'm ruining farmers' lives. My tariffs are a disaster for them. I'll send them $12 billion. And then the additional $10 billion to bring it up to $95 billion is, as I said, a fund aimed at incentivizing states to adopt Trump-backed voting restrictions, which he says 90% of America wants. And it turns out, obviously Trump said it, it's not true, but I think we also know different inherently. And if so many people wanted this thing, and there were so many reasons to get it. Oh, and I forgot about the new story about ID stuff. But if everybody agrees with it, then you don't need $10 billion to incentivize anybody to do anything. Down in Florida, they're spending money. The state is hand over fist, I guess, although then they stopped spending the rest of it, to change the name of Palm Beach International Airport to President Donald J. Trump International Airport, except they didn't pay, as you know, for finishing the signage changes. But they're content to hand over a couple billion at a time to do that. I don't think that they would have particular difficulty finding either enthusiasm for or money for paying for implementing the Save America Act down there either. But, if you can also send them a couple $1 billion, I suppose they'd be happy about that. And I imagine that there will be Republican legislators in certain states that say, yes, everybody wants this. Yes, we should be doing this. But how are we going to pay for it? And knowing that, the federal government might send them $1 billion to do it, if they put up a stink about it. But if the government sends them nothing, they'll just grudgingly pay for it and declare it to be a great victory for America. Right. The other ID story, if you haven't heard this one, just to throw it in there so that you're up to speed on what people are saying. Maybe you see snippets of it online and social media, and you're like, where the hell did this come from? So you remember that they started with the story, you need ID to buy Sudafed in this country, which Trump doesn't. But that was people were okay with it. Well, everyone buy beer. That's blue collar. Buy beer. You got to have ID to buy beer. Everybody wants to buy beer. in this country. So there you go. So something, but buying beer and voting don't really go hand in hand necessarily, although I'm sure it happens coincidentally at the same time for a lot of people. Possibly about 53% of those voting, let's say, in a presidential election might explain some things. Anyway, that never really caught on either. So now the new one is it has morphed. And the morphed form of it doesn't make that much more sense than the unmorphed form of it ever did, if it ever did. But long story short, the Republicans now will face cameras and tell them that you need ID to buy pasta at Olive Garden. So why shouldn't you have to show ID to vote? And again, the issue is not showing ID, but where did this come from? Somebody, I think, either made up the story or imagined that there could be such a story, or maybe it happened to somebody. That I don't think I've eaten in an Olive Garden in a while. It's not that I boycott Olive Garden or anything. It's just if we eat it, we pick up and go home. So I don't. I'm not on site to take advantage of their unlimited specials of various kinds. I think the constant one is what? Unlimited soup and breadsticks, which, I'm here for the pasta. Anyway, then they were like, well, we'll give the people what they want. We'll have unlimited pasta specials at certain points. And so I guess the story goes that they have some sort of unlimited pasta pass at Olive Garden. I'm not positive they have that. I mean, I've seen enough Olive Garden commercials. I know what they're doing for the summer, right? They got the, Calabrian specials. I no idea what it is, but they're forcing it down your, well, not forcing it actually down your throat. It is food. But they're putting the commercials in your face everywhere you go. And I don't ever see them say anything. And by the way, we also have the unlimited pasta pass, which is, I guess, a card of some kind. I don't know whether you buy into it or you just, if you agree to let us email you 100 times, you can have the unlimited pasta pass. Because what do we care? Because unlimited pasta. This is what we do, right? Anyway, although the unlimited seafood thing bankrupted Red Lobster, but still, it's less money for pasta. So anyway, the story goes that I guess there are such passes, although honestly, the people telling the story, I guess that there really are not such passes, but maybe you have one. And that I guess somebody somewhere must have gone to Olive Garden, purported to have one of these unlimited pasta passes, and says, MFer, I want more pasta. Do you remember that reference? The Bill O'Reilly thing? I want more iced tea. All right, never mind. If you don't, forget it. It's not that important. But apparently somebody must have gone to Olive Garden, said, I want more pasta. And I don't know, one, did they encounter resistance? What? More pasta at Olive Garden? F you. Wait a minute. I thought when I'm here, I'm family. Yes, and I come from an abusive family, so go F yourself. No more pasta for you. And it doesn't even look like you need it. But I have the unlimited pasta pass. Damn, foiled again. Wait, what if you've borrowed somebody else's? Worse, what if you murdered them and stole their murder? Did you hear me? Murdered them. Right, dramatic music. Horror dramatic music. What if you murdered them for their pasta pass? You carjacked them. They were citizens. You stole their IDs to hide in this country as illegal aliens and stole their unlimited pasta pass. Now you're living off the fat of the land. Truly. Show me your ID, and it better match the signature on the back of your unlimited pasta card, which also doesn't exist or have signature lines. And maybe it exists. Who cares? The point is, somebody claims they were asked to prove that the pasta pass that they were presenting was really theirs, and that somehow became, you got to show ID to be able to buy pasta at Olive Garden in this country. Now, there are plenty of other pasta options, if it were indeed true that you had this problem at Olive Garden, which it can't be true, because when you're here, you're family, and they don't need your ID, family, right? So, by the way, right? So they got into an argument with the server over that one. I thought it was family, but you already heard the out. So anyway, that has now morphed into, I guess Steve Scalise got on camera and said, just generally, I don't think he even remembered that it was Olive Garden, and just said, you gotta show ID to buy pasta in this country. All right, Scott has done the research that I needed here and found the never-ending pasta pass, which just ended, I guess, because government stepped in. So there you go. Oh, wait a minute. Now, this is from The Onion. What am I supposed to do with this? This can't be right. The Onion. Oh, okay. Never-ending pasta pass returns to Olive Garden. But again, if I'm looking at The Onion, what is the news value of this? I'm not supposed to believe that this is true. Although, all right, we'll take a look. Oh, wait, I have to deal with the cookies policy first. Do I dare accept all cookies from The Onion? Never-ending pasta pass returns to Olive Garden. What am I? Olive Garden announced the return of the never-ending pasta pass. Maybe, because this is The Onion. Giving pass holders 13 weeks of unlimited pasta for $100. What do you think? I guess it really happened, and what they're making up is funny responses from what are supposed to be people on the street responding to the question, what do you think about $100 for unlimited pasta? So there you go. I guess that's supposed to mean that it's a real thing that they're playing off of. But I never heard any demands for ID. But anyway, Steve Scalise got in his head that now you have to show ID to get pasta, which I think that would be the original outrage, I guess, for Republicans, right? What are we doing demanding ID for pasta? What happened to a free country? Like, I understand why for beer we got our reasons. I understand why for Sudafed we have our reasons that we should be, doing a better job of it. Although, honestly, usually they're screaming, why do I have to show ID for Sudafed? I have a cold. What's the problem? It's the controlled substances, whatever. But, same reason as the beer, which you somehow kind of got on board with, but maybe you didn't because you liked buying beer when you were underage when you were a kid. And golly, it was just because you were a good old-fashioned red-blooded American hellraiser or whatever. That you would think they'd be against requiring ID for pasta purchases, but it's not required anyway. So just so you know, if you see people riffing off of this thing, what that is about, I find that interesting, to say the least. Anyway, now we have to pay $10 billion to states to incentivize them to do more IDing of people, more carding of people for pasta, I guess. Anyway, by the way, the $95 billion price tag on the reconciliation thing is actually scaled back. I think we mentioned this earlier in the week, from a $350 billion proposal. Now they're down to $72 billion for the Pentagon and intelligence services. Originally, they were like, actually, we need $350 billion, which is amazing also. And I think they got so beat up in it over the hearings, even by Republicans, that they pared it back to $72 billion. And, I mean, they've already spent $350 billion on this thing once, dropping the most sophisticated, most expensive bombs on targets that really didn't require it. But that's a policy issue that we won't be dealing with, I guess, at this point. It's time for us to move on to some of the other stories, I guess, just so you know what else is going on. But it was a good riff, and it gave us a good hour's worth of the show to talk about the fact that they're doing this thing that ties together so many different threads of what's happening on Capitol Hill and in the conduct of the war along the way. All right. Also happening and requiring an eye on it is the people empowered to utilize the police power in this country continue to kill Americans more or less willy-nilly, and we'll see how many of them get away with it. Some small percentage of them are sometimes held to account, and the latest instance comes from Madison, Wisconsin, where it wasn't ICE, but I guess local police. And the Washington Post has the story. Protesters gather in Madison after man fatally shot by a police officer, once again captured on camera, and once again looks more or less like a cop on the scene, subdued a subject, They were no longer able to pose a threat, though they had posed a threat earlier. They had been incapacitated, pinned to the ground, tased, handcuffed, the whole thing. And somebody just says, why not just shoot them also? Because I'm mad about, the earlier menacing with a knife. And, injury, yes, but shall we just murder the people, or do we bring them to justice and bring them in front of a judge and, handle things that way? That's the problem. Okay, Rachel Lerman and Samuel Oakford wrote the story for the Post. A graphic video of the shooting during an attempted arrest in the Marquette neighborhood of Madison, Wisconsin, was quickly spread online, and apparently so graphic that I saw more people saying they wouldn't show the video than actually showing the video. So there you go. Protesters now have gathered in Madison on Wednesday night after a police officer fatally shot a man during an attempted arrest. They didn't attempt it very hard, though. An incident captured on graphic bystander video that quickly spread online. Authorities promised a full, transparent investigation and cautioned that the full circumstances of the shooting were still being determined. There's always that. A Madison Police Department officer shot the man while trying to arrest him. According to authorities, the man, who has not been publicly identified, was pronounced dead at a hospital, though it was pretty clear that he was dead on the street. The man pulled out a knife during a struggle with officers, injuring one of them. Police Chief John Patterson said in a news conference the officer who was hurt was the one who shot the man, according to the police department. I mean, that does give some context to it, but of course, the issue was that this suspect had been subdued. Everything he needed to do to remove the danger had been done. That notwithstanding, this cop was probably very mad. But that's not really here. That's neither here nor there. That's not supposed to be playing a part in any of it. Although we understand that human emotions come into things, murder is not supposed to. Patterson did not identify the officer who fired the shots, describing him only as a veteran officer. The victim was a man in his 30s. Patterson said his family's been notified. Protesters marched through downtown Madison on Wednesday evening. Videos from local news reporters showed shouting, "Whose streets? Our streets." The quite honestly, the typical stuff. People also gathered at a vigil with flowers and candles and interrupted crowds at an outdoor concert. City authorities said road closures will remain in place early Thursday. But main story here is that there's video, that there was, in fact, some sort of confrontation with a weapon, and a lot of people, that's all they need to hear in order to decide how they feel about the ensuing shooting. But apparently the video tells a story of what is essentially an unacceptable and ridiculous use of force by police, and feels like we've heard that story 100 times already, but each time you need to retell the story. Here's a recap of the events that led to it, according to the Post. Police officers were dispatched to the Marquette neighborhood just before 1 p.m. Wednesday in response to a report of a man checking the doors of parked vehicles. I guess it looks like he was going to try to rob them, to their view. Officers located a man who fled on a bicycle through backyards, somehow, he said. Officers caught up with the man around 1:30 p.m. near South Baldwin and Williamson Streets. During a struggle, an officer deployed a taser, while 3 other officers attempted to restrain the man, but the taser was, quote, unsuccessful. Should work on making it successful, I guess. Patterson said only 1 officer fired shots. So that's good. Only 25% of the officers on the scene. All 4 officers have been placed on administrative leave. Madison resident Michael Dubeck, 31, was getting a sandwich nearby, and you know how that can be, when he noticed a number of police cruisers in the area, pulled out a phone to record. A bicyclist had either fallen or been knocked off his bike, and 3 officers were crowded around him in the middle of the intersection. "He's got a knife," one of the officers yelled. Dubeck's video shows the man appeared to struggle with the 3 officers, rising up as they tried to force him to the ground. A 4th ran up, yelled, "Taser, taser, taser," and then discharged the taser. According to the video, the man collapsed to the ground on his side. Sounds successful enough to me so far. A moment later, as one of the officers pressed a knee to the man's lower back area, another fired 3 shots. It was basically point blank, 3 shots to the head and upper chest area, Dubeck said. And that's what's got people up in arms. It's right. Dubek said he didn't see a knife or any other weapon until after the bicyclist was shot, when an officer appeared to take a knife off his person and toss it to the side. It was so fast, so unexpected that I didn't really even have time before it began to see when it was over to even really kind of understand what was happening. I don't think I even understand the sentence, but I get the gist. After the shots were fired, a woman can be heard on the video as sirens wail, yelling, "I saw everything. You did not need to kill him." That's the gist of it. All right, so we'll find out more, I guess, about the situation as the investigation goes on, but basically they tased him, piled on top of him, and then whether there was a knife or not, we don't know. We'll find out later on, but yelled one of the key magical phrases that would supposedly, in their mind, justify deadly force, even though none of the other circumstances appeared to do so. So once again, we find ourselves in this situation. And just wanted to note it for the record because people will be talking about it, and rightly so, for the next couple of days, and maybe even longer, depending on how it plays out. Okay, other stories that require attention, and we've just got a minute or two to do it, but I'll start with this one that Scott sent me, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Scott. And you know he sent it to me because it comes from Jalopnik, I guess one of his favorite publications, quickly becoming one of mine. Canadians say screw it. And I knew they had done that in the past, said that. It's a phrase with which I think they're familiar. But here's why the very polite and friendly neighbors of the North have said screw it. They plan now to open the Gordie Howe Bridge, remember that? Without a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Now, that does sound drastic, doesn't it? Very Canadian to have a story be, we're not going to have a ribbon cutting. Why not, though? Aaron Marquis, do we say Marquis or Marquis? I don't know, Aaron, sorry, is the one who's written this one up, and we'll give it to you in 30 seconds before we take our break. The latest chapter of the international drama involving the Gordie Howe Bridge, the bridge Canada definitely paid for all by itself, is hopefully the end of the bittersweet story. The bridge will be open to traffic on Monday, but without fanfare. And we love fanfare here on this show. But this one without fanfare or an elaborate ribbon-cutting ceremony. Why? Because the guy who would, I guess, normally ostensibly be there for that ribbon-cutting ceremony, or his representative, President Donald Trump, now dropping new hefty retaliatory tariffs on Canada once again. All right, welcome back, everyone, to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Now we can do this story with all of the sound effects without messing things up too much. But yeah, do you remember the whole Gordie Howe Bridge thing? I kind of do. I know we discussed it on the show. Jalopnik will catch us up on it. Thanks to Aaron. Marquis, I'm going to guess, as we say in English, versus Marquis in French. Anyway, the story, I think, is recounted here, but yeah. So, like we said, international drama, that calls for music of its own. And the fact that it will be opened up without fanfare, and we have various fanfares available to us. Should we use, where's the old good one that I used to like to use for Greg that annoyed him too much and I had to stop it? There we are. Remember this? Wow, is that loud? And it's been so long that I don't have the volume set correctly on that one. So, okay, but that fanfare isn't happening. So instead we're getting crickets. We could use this fanfare. We know we used the one short for Greg, but Greg's not coming today. But it occurs to me we should probably try this one. Does that count as fanfare? I mean, if we were opening a bridge to Switzerland, it would make more sense. But anyway, I enjoyed that, and you should enjoy it too. What's happening? You recall that, this is a bridge that goes, of course, from Canada to the United States, or alternatively, from the United States to Canada. And so, usually, like, who's going to pay for the bridge? Why don't we share it? We are both going to benefit from it. Well, that's out the window because Donald Trump is president. And I don't know. There could be other circumstances involved, too. I forget exactly. Maybe we'll learn about them or be reminded of them in the ensuing paragraphs here. But whatever the case, Canada said, well, look, we need the bridge. The Americans are being ridiculous about things. So we'll just build the damn bridge. Who cares? And we'll recoup our costs in tolls. But of course, now that Donald Trump is president, like for a normal president, you would say, yeah, sure, that makes sense. You paid to build it. You collect the tolls. We didn't pay anything to build it. No toll to come into our end. That's fine. Trump, though, no, I want money. So, here we are. Now they're set to open the bridge, but not inclined to invite anybody from the United States to come and have a nice ceremony for it because Trump is doing his tariffs thing again. So now what? It's 50% tariffs, supposedly retaliatory trade tariffs. That doesn't even get into whether or not he's going to try and do some kind of tariff over the smoke. By the way, also in tariff news and sitting in my inbox here is another story. What's the headline on this one? Because that'll tell the whole story. Trump reignites tariff war is the headline that they used in the what do you call it? In the email. Anyway, I guess the full thing is Trump reignites tariff war despite legal losses. And they've used a weird fisheye lens sort of picture of him here that makes him look extremely small, which is odd, and he's not going to like that. But anyway, yeah, despite legal losses. In other words, the tariffs that he thinks he's going to impose will likely be struck down by courts because they're pretty much the same kind that were struck down last time, but he doesn't believe in precedent, so here we are. Anyway, that will come into play too. By the way, apparently it levies a 100% tariff on generic drugs imported from outside the country, which everybody in America is like clamoring for, bringing in at lower costs. And he wants to bring in higher costs because he doesn't care about costs because he's stealing billions of dollars and stuffing it into his pockets. Money is no object for him, even though it looks like he's he's grabbing every dollar he can, and he is. But he has no problem spending on it on covering. He would have no problem spending it on drugs that he needs covered, except let me just remind you, if there's anything else that can make you even angrier about finding out that your low-cost generic prescription drugs that we're bringing in from other countries, which once he campaigned on, like we should have that price for our drugs too. I guess that's what he really wanted rather than importing them. But anyway, he gets all of his for free through the White House physician, right? So he doesn't pay for prescription drugs, which I guess really would maybe lead you to wonder why he's not on Wegovy or something like it. But anyway, he isn't, or it doesn't appear to be. And but he does eat horse paste, I guess, or would be open to it, and also putting light bulbs, in various orifices and maybe drinking bleach if necessary. And it's so rarely necessary. Anyway, that wasn't what we wanted to talk about. What we wanted to talk about why Canadians were saying screw it and then apologizing afterwards. Here's the background. There's a lot, we're told, Aaron says, and here it is. Last month, Canada was considering a quiet ribbon-cutting ceremony to avoid Trump's ire, but even that plan had to be scrapped as behind-the-scenes wrangling between the two countries continued. Bridge officials were worried about riling... This is interesting, before I even get to this sentence, which is a great sentence, by the way, so hang on. Edge of your seat for this one. They're basically saying they thought about a quiet ribbon-cutting ceremony without, Trump or without having Americans come. They were just like, we'll do our own ceremony, right? I'm mad at you for tariffs, right? So I'm not inviting you. That makes sense. But then they were like, well, won't that make Trump mad? Well, it shouldn't. It makes a whole lot of sense. He'll understand why we're not. Yeah, he'll understand why we're not doing it, but that doesn't mean it won't make him mad. So now they're like, well, maybe we shouldn't even have a ribbon-cutting ceremony for ourselves. Having built this bridge, and it looks like a beautiful bridge, one big, beautiful bridge, and we should have our own ceremony. But they're denying themselves a ceremony for fear of raising Trump's ire. Now, bridge officials were worried about riling up the kooks and crackpots. That's enclosed in quotes, and then parenthetically it says, a.k.a. the U.S. government. But they have it right. So they were worried about that and having their own ribbon cutting ceremony, or even just opening the bridge, because the United States opposed the opening of the bridge. And now I recall that the issue was somebody else has a privately owned bridge that is the normal connection, I guess, the currently normal connection between the U.S. and Canada in that area. And They're, of course, enormously rich as a result, which means that Donald Trump listens to them and maybe even will let them into his pervert sex club in Florida if they ever visit. But more importantly, they're very rich and can give him money. So he says, no other bridges are allowed. Except people already said, one, what the hell do you mean? No other bridges allowed. Whatever happened to competition in this country? Oh, of course, it's not this country. It's the other country. But they have competition in their country. And why can't we build a bridge? Well, you can. But you risk raising the ire of the kooks and crackpots. That's how we got here. They were right to worry, Aaron continues. Trump turned this $4.6 billion piece of infrastructure vital to the economies of two nations into a bargaining chip, suspiciously after the billionaire private owner of the Ambassador Bridge paid, and I mean paid, about $1 million to a Trump super PAC. I see. After he paid a visit to Trump this spring, and by the parentheses should be here instead, so that it would read, the billionaire private owner of the Ambassador Bridge paid a visit to Trump this spring, by which I mean paid $1 million to Trump's super PAC. There you go. Got it? The opening was delayed and then delayed again until Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney agreed to pay a net profit-sharing deal with the U.S., which notably cuts out the state of Michigan, the state that paid for the new U.S. side pavilion on the bridge, over the next 15 years. The profit-sharing deal is what lasts 15 years. The parentheses is making it tough. But okay, it's not that big of a change, really, from the previous agreement, except it screws over Michigan for immediate gains rather than long-term financial health. Canada's debt from building the bridge will be dispensed with first via tolls collected solely on the Canadian side, along with funds needed for upkeep and maintenance for the bridge. It was one of those Pyrrhic victories that world leaders have been handing the 80-year-old leader of the free world to keep him quiet. So what is it now? Trump couldn't just take his pilfered candy and go home. The ribbon-cutting ceremony planned for this Friday would have involved officials from both sides of the Detroit River, but the ceremony was scrapped, apparently due to rising trade tensions the day after Trump announced a 50% tariff on Canadian goods in 30 days, unless the country, Canada, grants even more concessions to the U.S., according to the Detroit News. These tariffs appear to be retaliatory for the Canadian wildfires, and it may be that that's all he's planning with respect to the wildfires, but it was pointed out the reason given for this is something different, which would still, could be just a lie, and this is that he found out he couldn't just impose a tariff because wildfires, but it also may mean he'll just let this one stand and then try to do another one and say that one's due to wildfires, even if he loses. But yes, these tariffs do appear to be retaliatory for the Canadian wildfires, as Trump mentioned such measures during the final World Cup game. Couldn't just watch the goddamn game. His administration has denied the connection, however, citing instead Canada's removal of American booze from store shelves in April of 2025, according to the Washington Post. So, no big celebration. After years of construction and even more of simply wrangling all the permits and permissions, the Gordie Howe Bridge will open with a whisper. A whisper, not a bang. Never mind the sound of that. Michigan is likely relieved it will open at all. The state is, it says loosing, but we mean losing out on any profits from the bridge directly, but the delayed opening is still costing the Michigan economy an estimated $1 million a day in lost trade, according to the Detroit Regional Chamber, by which I imagine they mean Chamber of Commerce. So there you go. Just wanted to let you know that Canadians were saying screw it. They might not even be saying anything at all, but they're metaphorically at least saying screw it, and we believe that that's the case. And tariffs are involved, and there may be yet more to come. I did mention that there was the tariff issue looming again. Is there anything else besides the Canadian retaliation? That's Well, there are, the prescription drug thing. And then there's a long and involved story about the tariffs, but we'll perhaps save that for a different day. and move on from there. All right. Hey, I guess we can take care of this piece of business right here, right now. Usually it takes me, somewhere around 3 to 4 weeks to remember to get around to saying something about new sponsor, new membership, new subscribers via Patreon. And one of our most active and vocal live stream listeners, Mighty OCD, has joined in over at Patreon, although I believe he's been in and out and supporting the show from various angles and in different ways for a long time. But, we appreciate, all the contributions just to the discourse alone in our show. But, hey, financial support, you're supposed to call that out and say something nice about it. And we're doing so. Thank you very much for being one of the most loyal listeners and one of the many folks who will chime in with important stuff and unimportant stuff. We love the unimportant stuff, too, during the show. And now financially supporting us as well. Something we really have to work on, upping our game in these difficult times so that we can pay tariffs for imported, cheaper, generic drugs. All the important stuff. All right, other things to bring to your attention, and really we should just end on the high note there. But another thing that Scott sent me, I have a queue full of things that Scott has sent, not all of which I guess are eventually going to find their way onto air, but this one, it's not a smooth transition or anything, but just feels like maybe it ought to be on the record. This is another thing you might encounter on social media and wonder what the hell's going on here. The UK Independent, now with its own US edition, lets us know that Tulsi Gabbard's brother, but who cares, right? She's out, but still, you'll see why we care about this in a minute. Tulsi Gabbard's brother, accused of trying to lure children to his Hawaii hotel room with cash and gum, the international language of child abuse. True, cash and gum, according to police. And, is in a Hawaii hotel room, but they're from Hawaii, so I don't know. Anyway, his name is, is this right? Batarti, Batarti, Batarti Gabbard, was identified nearly a week after being arrested and accused of luring children as young as 9 to a hotel room, or at least attempting to, because as I understood the story when I heard about it the first time, they were all like, what, are you kidding? No. But they've all been taught about stranger danger. I did, in fact, see it described as a stranger danger alert in one of the original reports of this. But this is from John Bowden for The Independent, who says Tulsi Gabbard's brother was arrested and charged over an incident in which police said he attempted to lure several children to his hotel room in Waikiki by offering them gum and money. But these kids were staying in a hotel in Waikiki, and apparently they didn't lack for either, and were smart and said, get lost, weirdo. Batarti Gabbard, interesting names in that family, was arrested after an incident on July 12th, according to a press release from the Honolulu Police Department. He was positively identified several days later. According to the release, his family says he's undergoing psychiatric treatment. That sounds good. At about 2 p.m. on Sunday, July 12th, an unknown man allegedly approached several children, including a 9-year-old boy, and offered them gum and money to accompany him to his hotel room. He also asked the children for their names and wrote them in a notebook. The children refused. I guess they might have given the names. And the man walked away, read the police description of events. So, you're still going to want to check into that. But good for the kids. They've been well trained and well taught. I'm glad that it worked out that way rather than the other way, but still. His sister Tulsi left the Trump administration in June, citing her husband's cancer diagnosis as a reason. A lot of bad things happening to Tulsi Gabbard of late. What can you do? While in office, she was seen as taking a new political bent to her job when in January she personally oversaw an FBI raid of election offices in Fulton County, Georgia, just so you don't forget, where President Donald Trump sought to overturn the election results in 2024, and he subsequently faced criminal prosecution. Gabbard's father told Fox News that his son had agreed to abide by hospital protocol as he remains in custody. And from there, I mean, it's pretty much standard fare in terms of the family saying, hey, you know, maybe some privacy, whatever. We're going to do what we can to try to get him, brother. Appreciate your prayers. But, okay, whatever. They may be praying in different fashion. I'll say that. It was one of the last stories we read about their involvement in, like, kind of cult activity. So, okay. Anywho, the rest of the story appears to be about Bill Pulte being a jackass as a replacement for Tulsi Gabbard. And I guess now all there is to do is to wait for Bill Pulte's brother to be arrested on child molestation charges as well. And, I mean, the chances are as good as any other. I don't know if he has brothers and sisters or not, but if he does, then I guess you need to check their activities online. I don't know. Is this a precedent? I don't think you can usually, impute that to others the same way as Republicans might do. But there you have it. I don't know. It could be talked about. Doesn't need any more attention than that at the moment. All right. Let's see. Here's something that I guess you could say there's a segue to be made. This will be a good opportunity to bring this story up. I'm going to use the Daily Kos write-up from Alex Breeden on this one, just to make sure you're aware of this. The Tate brothers have been arrested again. Good. We're glad about that. How glad? Glad enough to be able to run with the Daily Kos headline. Thank God for Daily Kos headlines. Tate brother douchebags finally run out of places to hide. That's the kind of headline we like reading. The Tate brothers might have gotten too comfortable with their MAGA-backed freedom in the U.S. And you all recall the story, I'm sure it'll be recounted here in this story, about how they, A, have ended up in the United States, and B, the reason that they're here is, of course, that Donald Trump exerted international pressure to spring them from jail and investigation by the authorities in Romania, where they were rightfully arrested and facing horrific human trafficking and rape charges. And, well, it turns out there are more countries in the world interested in prosecuting them for these crimes, because a lot of them are committed on the internet for money, of course. That's their business model. And that means there'll be a lot of countries that have a nexus to this and want to do something about it. Over the weekend, Tristan and Andrew Tate were seen, and boy, were they seen, being taken into custody in Miami and now face being extradited to Britain to face emerging charges. If you haven't seen the video of their arrest, you should. I don't know what's going on, but basically I did see somebody on social media describing this thing as everybody at the Tate brothers' arrest is dressed like they're in a circus. I don't know how. I don't know. I can describe to you that Andrew Tate, I recognize which one of the brothers is Andrew, was dressed in some sort of like purple satin shirt and what looked like kind of like capri style pants that ended like mid calf on him, and then no socks and some kind of, I don't know what shoes. But anyway, he looked ridiculous. And I think Tristan was dressed in something equally ridiculous, some sort of weird like 3-piece suit and a fedora. But then it looked like one of the arresting officers was also dressed up in some sort of weird costume. Maybe he was undercover and riding with them on their way to I don't know where in Miami. But they looked ridiculous. And it just, for like the guy who's like, I'm the tough guy, alpha male, sort of, beat everybody up and kind of guy, like you'd think he'd be dressed a little differently. It was very, very strange. And I mean, maybe, I guess if you're just in the habit of going around beating everybody up, you might also say, I'm gonna dress provocatively so that it prompts a fight when somebody makes a comment about my clothes. I don't know. Anyway, Andrew, back to the real stuff. Andrew faces 10 charges tied to 3 women, including rape, actual bodily harm, human trafficking, and controlling prostitution for gain. And by the way, there are still Republicans out there like, yeah, they're not guilty. Let them go. Tristan faces 11 charges tied to one woman that include rape, human trafficking, and actual bodily harm. These 4 women and 21 charges are in addition to the previous charges the brothers faced in Romania and the UK as well. All of this comes after the brothers made a visit to Washington, D.C. last week, where the 2 admitted misogynists were pictured huddled up with Texas Republican Wesley Hunt. I don't know what's so special and disgusting about Wesley Hunt that they decided to hang out with him. But yeah, they're celebrities in MAGA land, and it doesn't make any sense. And, QAnon should be going crazy. These are the actual human traffickers. But you know how it is. They are on the Republican and MAGA side because Republicans and MAGA keep springing them from jail, I guess, and giving them money. So I think the affinity is natural enough, but why are they doing this? No one knows. Anyway, if you ask the Tate's lawyer, he paints a larger picture of their visit. Speaking to reporters outside of the courthouse Monday, Joseph McBride claimed that it was their visit across Capitol Hill that set all of this into motion. Yes, it was politically motivated. There's no question about it, he says, of their arrest. McBride said in response to a reporter, if McBride's name sounds familiar, it doesn't. But what's the name again? Joseph McBride. If it did sound familiar, this would be the reason why. It might be due to his previous work defending January 6th rioters. But if they can prove that the UK's attempt at extradition is politically motivated, the US will grant an exception, and I guess not extradite them. Ultimately, this decision falls, unfortunately, on Secretary of State Marco Rubio. These guys went to D.C. to exercise their First Amendment rights as private citizens. They met with friends in Washington, D.C., of which they should have none, of course. But they walked the grounds of the Capitol, and 3 days later, they're in a jumpsuit. You do the math, McBride added. Okay, the math is -5. That's the answer. What does that mean? There are probably 5, I would say at a minimum 5 Republicans that these guys met with on Capitol Hill who should also be arrested and put in jumpsuits. So there's the math as far as I'm concerned. The eldest brother, 38-year-old Andrew, has also been sued by his ex-girlfriend for charges that fit the profile as well. Like what? Well, here's a quote from model Brianna Stern, who said, "I was scared to death." When she spoke to NBC News in May of 2025, so scared I was terrified that I might die. Well, yeah. You were metaphorically scared to death, but you were scared of death, and we understand that to be the case. Stern's lawsuit claimed that Andrew had choked her and beat her face during a moment of consensual sex that turned violent. The Tates have become a symbol of the far right's manosphere, which has cuddled up with MAGA culture in the past few years, and their support from the White House is apparent. Despite ongoing charges from Romania and the UK, including similar criminal charges and civil lawsuits, the brothers have traveled freely throughout the U.S. for over a year after a reported helping hand from U.S. Special Envoy Rick Grenell. Grenell has allegedly pleaded with Romanian officials to lift a travel ban in place on the brothers, though he denied doing so in a statement to Daily Kos. Paul Ingracia, a White House official who had previously represented the brothers, had intervened with the investigation of Andrew and Tristan as well. When the two landed in Fort Lauderdale, Florida in 2025, after their travel ban was lifted, Customs and Border Patrol seized their electronic devices. But, thanks to Ingracia, they were ordered to return them as the two walked free. So it is possible to rein in Customs and Border Patrol from time to time. And while President Donald Trump has publicly steered clear of any statements on the men, his sons have ties to the two controversial characters. Barron has been rumored to have a close relationship with the brothers, allegedly collaborating with the influencers as his father was on the campaign trail. Don Jr. has also publicly backed the two men. It's unclear whether the extradition charges will be granted, given the deep ties the brothers have in the standing administration. Okay. And as the president has stood to even defend political opponents facing sexual assault allegations, oddly enough, it's not so clear that he would start denouncing these men now. So big question mark as to whether they actually get extradited or not. But glad to see them facing extradition and in handcuffs. That was very valuable to see on video. All right, there's much more out there. We got to take another break. We are going to take another break. We don't have to, but you won't be able to hear anything that we say for the next 2 minutes regardless. So, it's a good thing. We need these breaks. All right. So half an hour left to wrap things up today. Plus, we still have our Friday show. We're going to clear out some backlog here. Lots of stories that we need to touch on just so you have some idea what the hell people are talking about once the weekend rolls around. All right, stay tuned. Much more to come. We will be right back. But there's still 5 seconds before we leave. Blah, 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 blah. We'll see you then. Hi, it's me, David. I mostly do the commercials around here, too. Have you ever thought you'd like to do a show like this one, but a lot shorter? Maybe without necessarily waking up early each day, or even, let's say, working at it each day? Well, now you can, sort of, and by now, I mean pretty much any time you want, because what I'm talking about is you recording a news story, sharing an essay, or otherwise contributing your thoughts on these crazy times with the rest of us, and with any digital recording device. Make the show your own, as I like to say. Send me a digital file of your recording, a link to any source material, and a note about how you'd like to be identified on the air at KagroX, that's KAGROX @gmail.com, and I'll take it from there. Don't worry about those ums and ahs either. I sure don't, but I'll even do my best to edit your submission down into a nice-sounding dispatch from the field. So come on, everybody, make the show your own. Help me prove once and for all that I'm not just imagining this audience. All right, welcome back, everyone, to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see, we got half an hour to tell you yet more stories. I feel like maybe there's a theme here to things that are like smaller bore stories, but that I think are getting a lot of buzz and deserve some attention. Here's a weird one, for instance. You may perhaps have heard, because we checked in on it a couple times on the show, about Jean Carroll finally getting the $5 million or so that she won the first time around in her first suit against Donald Trump released to her from the courts. Remember that Trump lost this case years ago, and of course, insisted on appealing, but that they said basically, you've lost at the trial level. If you want to appeal, you're going to have to put the money you were ordered to pay in escrow. It needs to be out of your hands. You can't be earning with it. You owe it to Jean Carroll. So at least you got to put it in escrow, and we'll hold it. And if you win your appeal, fine, we'll return it to you. But if you lose your appeal, then the money gets released to Jean Carroll. Just like, the way the legal system works, right? But not for Donald Trump, of course. But we did hear recently, the courts said, look, you've exhausted your appeals. That you even tried to appeal this to the Supreme Court of the United States, which is ridiculous because they just have no business meddling in this at all. There's nothing for them to do. And in fact, they told you as much. No, we're not going to take the case. Well, there's no other courts you can appeal to. So that's it. You lose. Release the money. And they fought for a while, but they did, in fact, release the money. And even then, I was like, I want to hear that it's like in her bank account now. When are we going to find that out? So that's done. Congratulations. Fantastic. Do you think that's enough for Donald Trump? No, of course not. And we're back with the Independent again on this one. Jean Carroll's lawyers blast Trump's attempts to claw back money he was ordered to pay her. What? Like, when is there any finality with anything? Not when it comes to Donald Trump and money that he thinks he can take from you. President Donald Trump already paid out millions in the sexual abuse and defamation case. Now he wants it back. Well, I'm sure he wants it back, but so what? Well, let's figure out what's going on here. Alex Woodward is reporting this story for The Independent, and I saw a first mention of it elsewhere, but I think this was the first full write-up I think I got on it. President Donald Trump is trying to force E. Jean Carroll to pay back the $5.6 million he was ordered to pay the former Elle magazine writer after a federal jury found him liable for sexual abuse and defamation. That money was disbursed to Carroll from a court-controlled escrow account on July 9th. That did happen. I'm going to have to read this from the Instapaper version, at least for the moment. Let's see. Oh, how come this is getting in the way? All right, let's see. I got to find my place from the story. Okay. So the president's legal team is now seeking an emergency injunction that would order Carroll to return the payment to the account in the hopes that the Supreme Court, remember them? They already said no to this, will grant him a legal Hail Mary and reverse the judgment, sending the money back to him. That is pretty amazing. And I mean, there's a story to be told there about Donald Trump not understanding that no means no, even when it comes from the Supreme Court. But, you're going to have to put that one together in your head. All right, let me see if there's an easier way to read this in a format that would be more amenable to our being able to smoothly understand this thing. I guess not. That's too bad. All right, well, one more attempt. There we go. That one might work. Are we going to get it or are we not going to get it? I don't know. All right, well, looks like Instapaper is the least disruptive of the ways. But anyway, rather than accept the reality that he had lost, Trump has engaged in a series of maneuvers trying desperately to forestall payment, lawyers for Carroll wrote in legal filings Monday night. That payment to Carroll, by the way, more than 3 years after the jury's verdict, that should have been the end of the case, her lawyers said. But defendant now demands, and defendant is Donald Trump, now demands yet another unprecedented remedy. The judgment here is final. The money has already been disbursed, and Carroll is entitled to keep it. That should be the end of the story, but no. Trump's request also comes to the court with very unclean hands, the lawyers say, after repeating the same defamatory attacks against Carroll that lost him the case in the first place, her lawyers wrote. And don't forget that there's another case out there that she also won, which upped the ante to like $83 million when, after losing the first case, he insisted that he could continue running his mouth and saying the whole thing was a hoax because she's, not even his type, and that cost him $83 million. Anyway, I mean, this is just astonishing, quite honestly. Each attack has a domino effect and subjects Carroll to ongoing and prolific harassment as a result of these statements, including the multitude of death threats and other threats of physical injury, her lawyers said. A 7-year legal battle follows the first of 2 defamation lawsuits from Carroll, who accused Trump of assaulting her inside a Manhattan department store in the mid-1990s. A federal jury unanimously awarded her $5 million after finding him liable for sexual abuse and then defaming her with his denials. A separate jury in 2024 ordered the president to pay Carroll another $83 million in additional defamation charges. On July 8th of this year, New York District Judge Lewis Kaplan ordered a court-monitored escrow account to begin payments from the initial verdict, the $5 million one, after the Supreme Court rejected the president's appeal. She then, finally, at long last, received $5,625,005.48. Not really sure where. I guess that's maybe interest on things. Anyway, Trump has repeatedly denied Carroll's claims, which he has labeled a, quote, hoax and a, quote, con job to boost sales for her memoir. After the Supreme Court rejected his petition last month, he called the case fake and repeated his claim that he never met Carroll, statements at the center of the defamation lawsuits against him. He plans to continue the fight against this weaponization and lawfare case against me, including the ridiculous claim of defamation, with all my power and strength, of which, of course, we see a dwindling supply every day. That he wrote on Truth Social on June 30th, and then followed up with, this case is really against the United States of America and all it stands for, and should never be allowed to happen to another president or candidate to be, he added. I mean, ridiculous idea, stupid concept. Trump's lawyers said Carroll should wait until the Supreme Court, quote, fully decides whether to rehear the president's attempts to overturn the verdict. Otherwise, he faces an unrecoverable loss of millions of dollars that will cause him irreparable harm. Why would it cause him irreparable harm? If the Supreme Court says you're not supposed to have taken this $5.6 million from him, they could just say, give it back. What's irreparable about that? Nothing. Earlier this month, her lawyers argued Trump is merely trying to buy time so he can try to concoct some new basis to put off paying Carroll. Carroll's lawyers now say he's run out of options. Defendant has lost before a jury, the district court, a unanimous Second Circuit panel, the full Second Circuit en banc, and the Supreme Court of the United States. He agreed in a signed stipulation that Carroll could collect her judgment once his certiorari petitions had been denied. That happened, they wrote on Monday. Carroll should not have to wait any longer. I mean, there's no excuse in the world for making her wait at this point or trying to recapture this money. Meanwhile, Trump's Department of Justice has joined his Supreme Court fight to prevent Carroll from receiving another $83 million from the president. Trump took the extraordinary step of trying to replace himself as defendant with the U.S. government as he fights for, quote, immunity from having to pay her. A brief court filing signed by top Justice Department officials earlier this year claims there is good cause to pause the case and let the administration argue Trump's immunity claims on his behalf. The Supreme Court has not yet decided whether to hear that case. But, of course, it's pretty much the same case as the $5 million case, and they have already agreed they're not interested in that one. But, they might become interested now because Trump might threaten to kill them. So who knows? I mean, there's just no end to it with this guy. He just doesn't believe in the rule of law, period. All right. And why should they? Maybe there's no such thing as the rule of law, and there might, in fact, not be one if this story is to be believed, and it's not one that's about, an actual case involving the rule of law per se, but something completely different. Can I read this one, or is this I thought I already had an account here, but maybe not. But notice, which I've read a couple of times here, and maybe I've just read it, either gift articles or some other version. Let me see if I can't open this thing up. It's a simple enough thing to have a free account, I suppose, but I think it will actually be faster to try to read things this way. Maybe I can take care of this one off the air. But, Notice seems to have proven their worth to us at this point. Dang, this is taking forever, isn't it? All right. Well, I'll try a couple other options. But the basics of the story here are rather remarkable. I guess as part of, this might work, celebrations of the America's 250th anniversary, or the semi-quincentennial, as I like to call it, because that's the word for it. At some point, they decided, I guess the Department of Education, which, is still nominally functioning, said they would hold some sort of a citizenship bee, essentially, a contest for, civics to celebrate the 250th anniversary of our independence. But guess what? They effed it up. And they did so on purpose. And here's how. In order to be racist. All right? Is that enough story? Suspicion and doubt at the National Civics Contest, where really there shouldn't be any, right? The rule of law, etc., after all, is at stake here. That's the headline. Suspicion and doubt at the National Civics Contest. America's finest young scholars competed to mark their country's birthday. It led to a disputed finish in the age of mistrust. And here is a picture of the person who actually should have won, apparently, Angad Singh. And that should give you some idea of why in the Trump administration he was declared not to be the legitimate winner. Angad Singh. Though he's from Milford, Connecticut, he looks like a foreigner. And so therefore you can't win. Angad Singh, by the way, 15 years of age, yet being victimized by the president and his sycophants. Here's it's illustrated with a photo of him competing in the Presidential 1776 Award competition. They came up with a very dumb name for it, but still, the award was valuable. So why not try to win, especially if you are, actually quite knowledgeable. Sam Fortier wrote this for Notice. The morning after the competition we began, Angad Singh's family was trying to figure out what went wrong. And what went wrong was they said, you didn't win, even though he really should have. They were walking through the National Museum of Natural History, going over answers and doing the math. It doesn't make sense, said his mother, Ramandeep. Ramandeep was good at numbers, but she couldn't make them explain how her 15-year-old son had missed the top 3 in the Presidential 1776 Award competition, the civics contest for high schoolers that President Donald Trump's party planners had created to celebrate America's 250th birthday. She had watched the first round when the field was whittled from 20 to 8, and the second round when it went from 8 to 3. There was celebrity host Mario Lopez, an exclusive broadcast deal with CBS, and a Kennedy Center stage that mixed game show spectacle with civic pageantry. The only thing missing was a scoreboard. She told herself not to complain. She didn't want to be that mom, a sore loser whose kid could never fail. On their way out, though, other parents kept stopping them. Shocked, said more than one. Later, a boy stopped her and said a group of contestants had kept score themselves. We thought he won, the boy said. She approached an official from the Department of Education, which had helped run the contest, and she asked them for the final scores. Proprietary, the official said. Well, they're not proprietors of anything, but proprietary, meaning we don't have to tell you, I guess. In the museum, Ramandeep furrowed her brow. How do they count the numbers? She said. That's something we need to understand. We can only find out when they telecast it, said her husband, Balindar. Ramandeep pursed her lips. The broadcast was 3 weeks away. Why? I don't know why it takes them 3 weeks to get the thing on the air, but okay. It wasn't like them to feel skeptical. She and Balindar were Indian immigrants whose trust in the American system had led to degrees, careers, and citizenship. They bought a 4-bedroom colonial in a quiet Connecticut city and sent their kids to public school. They passed their faith in the United States down to Angad, who won awards for his speeches about the country's founding ideals. So, of course, you got to put the screws to him, right? But now they, like so many others, were wondering whether the game was rigged, which, of course, pleases Trump to no end. See? Now they know. Everything's rigged. It was a reluctant half step into the age of suspicion. The U.S. was just one of many democratic nations riding the same wave of paranoia, with polls showing trust in major institutions at or near all-time lows. In America, the president questioned whether the elections were free and fair as citizens sank deeper into the embrace of their tribes. The world's leading deep fake expert told the New York Times that he no longer trusted his own eyes, that our whole visual system was on the verge of collapse. Really, visual system. That's quite astonishing. And just as the Singhs were walking the halls of the museum, senators and Trump judicial appointees on Capitol Hill were sparring over the results of a presidential election that happened 6 years ago. Angad's parents didn't want to accuse anyone of fixing the competition, but they felt compelled to ask questions because their son never would. When his mother had dropped him off for his first day of kindergarten, He did not cry, even though she could tell he wanted to. For years, the story served as a tidy summation of her son, a rule follower who hid his emotions, an intellectual who didn't mind having more books than friends. But at some point, she had figured out how to tell he was upset. He would take little sips of water over and over again. And shortly after noon, the Singhs left the museum and went to a cafe. When Angad opened the door, he ran into the blonde girl from Wyoming, Miriam Washut, Washut, I guess, W-A-S-H-U-T, who he was pretty sure had won the whole thing. She must be headed to the White House for the special tour of the Oval Office, he thought. Her father, wearing a black cowboy hat, stuck out his hand. You did extremely well, he said. Thank you, Angad said, because he's a nice kid, right? The three finalists met with President Donald Trump alongside Education Secretary Linda McMahon and contest host Mario Lopez in the Oval Office. And here is a photo of the three of them doing so. Looks great. They have nice little medals and medallions that they're wearing around their neck and holding in their hands. Angad, though, turned to Miriam, whose eyes dropped to the floor. Her voice pitched up. She waved her hands at her sides. That was insane, she said. You clearly knew everything. Oh, they acknowledge it, huh? Angad nodded, face blank, and Miriam's family went on their way. Angad walked over to his parents' table. What did she say? His father asked. That I should have won, Angad said. No one said anything for a long time. Angad took a small sip of water. 3 weeks later, Angad's family took positions in the living room. His dad was on one couch, laptop open to a spreadsheet titled 1776 broadcast audit. His mother, was on the edge of the other couch, drumming her right foot like a kick pedal. Angad was between them, lying on a recliner with his feet up, talking quietly to his little sister. On the side table was a black metal water bottle. He had just filled it. They were at his uncle's house in suburban Toronto, where they vacationed every year. Ramandeep and her brother had grown up on a farm in India. They didn't go back much. They liked how little their kids knew about homesteading. That's good news for them. Yeah, now the siblings were competing to see who could own the biggest house in North America. And her brother, a hardware engineer, was winning. Ramandeep had done everything to help her kids get ahead, too, including giving them names that started with 2 A's, in part so they'd always be first in alphabetical lists at school. Okay. It began online with the impossible civics test, Mario Lopez said on TV, and everyone in the room stopped talking. CBS didn't show the round of 20, and it cut the opening speech from Education Secretary Linda McMahon. That's probably helpful. There is hope for the next 50 years that the flame of liberty still burns bright in the next generation, she had said. The great American story is still being written by you, unless you're brown, in which case you're out. They hoped that the broadcast would include a live scoreboard so they could see where things went wrong, but the first segment sped by without one. Why aren't they showing scores? His uncle asked. Then the second segment sped by too. What's the score? Angad said, looking at his dad. I don't know, his dad said. The show was going too fast, and the commentary in the living room was too loud for him to keep up. But, you got a pause button. I assume that you don't know what the score, because you don't know how much any question is worth. They didn't tell you that, I don't think. Angad knew he'd been behind at this point. He'd won the buzzer race only once in 8 questions, but the final 2 segments were far more valuable, and he knew he'd done well. On TV, Mario Lopez introduced the third segment. Each contestant would stand alone at the lectern to answer a multi-part question about the U.S. Constitution. Then, each of the 5 judges would grade it. Angad watched the contestants. The boy from Michigan got a full 20 points. The girl from Washington did too. So did the girl from Wyoming. According to Article 3 of the Constitution, in which cases do the federal courts have jurisdiction? The proctor said to Angad on TV. List at least 4 for full credit. As he answered, little summary boxes popped up on screen. Maritime jurisdiction, green. parties of state and citizens of another state. Red. What? And God said on the couch, his voice sharp. He got 2 more green boxes, then another red. Case with state and foreign nation. What? He said again. He handed his dad his phone. He'd pulled up the Constitution and highlighted a paragraph with the phrases, quote, between a state and citizens of another state, and between a state or the citizens thereof and foreign states, citizens, or subjects. Read this, read this, read this, read this right now, Angad said. His dad read it. It's within the Constitution, he said. At the end of the segment, the scoreboard flashed on screen. Michigan was first with 23 points, Angad sixth with 16. He took a sip from his water bottle. They just made the whole thing for a show, his uncle said. They know who they want to win. The final challenge was a lightning round. Each contestant had 30 seconds to answer as many questions as possible, and each correct answer was worth 2 points. Michigan got 10 right. Washington, 10. Wyoming, 10. Then Angad came to the stage. The first question flashed on the monitor. Which amendment ended slavery? Angad answered. Incorrect. 13th, Angad cried on the couch. I said 13th. After that, TV Angad started flying. All the nights he and his dad had practiced the lightning round were paying off. He processed questions nearly instantly and answered almost without thinking. The screen said, +2, +2, +2. The final, Angad got one more wrong, but watching from the couch, he didn't protest. He saw now the judges had wanted a more technical answer. In the end, the judges marked 12 answers correct. Angad concluded they must have thought he pronounced 13th like 14th. I say that 13th like an F sound. 13th, I guess. Later, he'd feel validated when he realized the auto-generated subtitles said 13th. Before Mario Lopez revealed the top 3, he walked around the stage and interviewed every contestant. Angad gave a polished answer about his being proud to share his knowledge of the nation's founding principles. The girl from Washington was brought to tears again. A boy from Arizona said winning would mean everything. I've always wanted to meet the man, the myth, the legend, Donald Trump. Oh boy. After the finalists were announced, Angad watched Michigan, Washington, and Wyoming take center stage. On TV, he calmly applauded. On the couch, he picked up his water bottle and took a big gulp. Angad's family watched the rest of the program in relative quiet. Miriam from Wyoming won, just as Angad had suspected, and then the finalists took a trip to the White House. They stood by the Resolute desk, a snapshot of Trump's education agenda. Miriam was homeschooled. The boy from Michigan attended a private Catholic school. The girl from Washington who went to public school had told CNN that she supported Trump and believed the most important thing was everyone walking away from the competition knowing this is the greatest country in the world. In the Oval Office, she told the president she wanted to go to Hillsdale College. Hillsdale, Angad's father said. Republican College, Angad reminded him. They'd been on campus in Michigan last month for the American Legion's National Oratorical Contest. The school had donated $10 million to the president's Freedom 250 committee and helped develop its history programs. I can give you a recommendation, the president said to the girl. I think we should let you get in. The finalists left with 2 commemorative coins, one of which said, The Final Mission, a reference to the education secretary's promise to, quote, sunset a 46-year-old, $3 trillion failed federal education bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. Awesome to give him a medal on that. Then the broadcast ended. You could have been there, Angad's father said. Everyone let his words hang in the air. Over a late dinner of curry chicken, 2 factions began to form. Angad and his father thought the judges must just be incompetent or mistaken. Angad's mother and uncle suspected conspiracy. Someone had not wanted the brown kid in the turban to represent the youth of America in the Oval Office. His uncle advised him to go directly to the education department. I don't think that's going to help you. The whole point is to initiate the investigation, he said. They wanted to bring attention to it. I can't blame them for that. They may have some kind of intention that these people shouldn't be there, his mother said. You don't know that, Angad replied. You're just assuming. Angad spooned out more chicken and rice. I personally think that they just had faulty sources, he said. Discussion turned to the 5 judges. They were all teachers from across the country who were past recipients of the prestigious James Madison Memorial Fellowship to study the Constitution. At least 3 of them must have mistakenly graded the constitutional answers as incorrect, Angad said, and it seemed likely to him that they hadn't memorized Article 3 as well as he had, or maybe his answers didn't match the phrasing on their rubrics. That shows ineptness, he said. After tiramisu, yum, Ramandeep made an impassioned case for justice. She didn't care about the share of the $250,000 scholarship money. Ooh, geez, I would. But she wanted recognition for Angad's hard work, and if the system was really biased, they had to fight on behalf of every kid who could be hurt by it. But we don't know if it's systemic, Balinder replied. He defended trusting the system, trusting the nation's founding documents, which he had devoted hours to helping their sons study. A few bad judges don't undermine an entire system. Oh my goodness. Angad's uncle had gone to bed. Angad was on the couch, eyes closed. If they made a strong case, Balinder said, maybe the education department would admit its mistake. How that I mispronounced it. Ramandeep doubted they'd ever even get a response. She was equally pessimistic that they could get anywhere by filing a lawsuit. We will not be able to afford to fight against the system. On that point, Balinder had to agree. The best strategy, Ramandeep said, was media attention. And here they are. They could present their findings and let the public decide. That's your power, she said, turning to me. This was uncomfortable. Weeks earlier, as I looked for a way to write about America's 250th, the Education Department recommended I reach out to the Singhs. And then I followed Angad through the competition, not knowing if he would even advance. Now their predicament felt like a window into something bigger. If the government or the courts couldn't bring them justice, then maybe they thought the media could. All I could do was write what happened, but the Fourth Estate was another institution at low ebbs in trust and influence, and Balinder knew it.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with Tate Waldman.
Yes, right. Well, at least our story is in front of the public, Ramandeep said. That's our closure. Closure is the right word, Balinder said. All out of words, he reassured his wife they would figure it out together. She gave him a tired smile, and they went upstairs. Now you know the story. You might hear people talking about it over the weekend, too. We'll be back tomorrow.